So certainly we have a strong question which we can raise perhaps in this style. Zizek sometimes references Rosa Luxemburg's notion, which is along the lines of you have to start the fire if you want the water to boil. So by probing into this question of here I'll gloss it as Simmel and Simmel's Dasein and the anti-Semitismus as a constituent, power, which we are now the constitutive beings within this field of power. So the political problem raised by Foucault, who we said is Heideggerian largely, of the creation of the subject, we can see back already, if we take it out of Foucault where it's perhaps more, has greater candor, we can see it in what with the risk of doing violence to Hobbes. So supposing Hobbes wasn't necessarily going to follow a perfect path of development towards Foucault, but nonetheless we're thinking of this in this terms of the constitutive power in Hobbes. We can clarify what this constitutive power means by thinking of Hobbes' problem, which was taken up later on by Thomas Jefferson. So people like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Robespierre and Danton and so on. These are people with clear constitutive power because they've set up a constitution which has produced an order which then many people stand within the country going forward. Whether that power can ever be reinitiated and reclaimed by the living people is a problem that was raised by Hobbes with his notion of that the dead should not rule over the living, which was Jefferson had proposed that there should be a new constitutional convention within the lifetime of every American citizen, for instance, on this same notion. So this is an attempt to reclaim the constitutive power. This is also at the center of the Hayek questions. Remembering Dugan has placed Hayek as a landmark by which we can go on trying to reinitiate this question of what the liberal order is, an early landmark. So, and in Hayek you have this issue of the difference between laws as what the legislature can enact, statutory law, and the law of the Constitution, whereby he wants to say has an analytic proposition for the sake of clarity to say that the Bill of Rights aren't properly laws. They're they should be understood as part of the legislative power, and insofar as the 13th Amendment operates on the Bill of Rights, you can see how that gets into a lot of problems. I mean, that's an amendment, so it's part of the Constitution, so it's part of the constitutive power, which arose out of the something like this possibility of reinitiating constitutional conventions, but the way it's operated upon by the lawmaker rather than by the founder, But the founder could be at any time. It could be right now, as and it should be constantly right now, according to the dictate of the notion of Hobbes that the living should always be the rulers over themselves and not the dead over the living. So there's a lot of difficulties there, but I just say that in order to show what the constitutive power means in this major instance of the political struggle. But in the violence as it goes back towards this so-called sacred violence and the Benjamin concept and so on, we can finally ask, is there a constituent power which is founding Dasein? And how so far does that go? So Jaspers has said that the thinker should simply straightforwardly say what's self-evident to them. So it's self-evident to me that in this question of the anti-Semitismus and the questions regarding Heidegger with this Schwartz notebooks, his black notebooks, the phrase planetary major criminal, or it's the ordinary German word Verbrecher, which has breaker in it, like lawbreaker, criminal. There's other words for that. Connected up, but made bigger with this Haupt, or high, or major criminal, or head, I guess is the literal meaning there. So planetary Haupt, Verbrecher. It's self-evident to me that in this, what Heidegger wants to say is something has happened with a very few people, such as Minkowski, the teacher of Einstein, who created this Minkowski space, which has accomplished the exclusion of future from calculations in the sciences, replaced future with distance. Heidegger has spoken on this in one of his early lectures, where he confronts the Bergson critique of Einstein. This is linked up to the Moses Mendelssohn. It ultimately stems to Moses Mendelssohn's, who was in a way favorably disposed towards Kant, has said Kant is the all crusher. So all this Zermalmer, the Malmer is like is crushing, or the picture, it's sort of the something being crushed in the teeth or so forth. But I think this is the, self-evidently what Heidegger was getting at in this term. So we have Simmel here to again make this, remembering that these terms had a totally different imaginative force to them when we were talking about theories which were about the migrations of people and about people becoming herds people in various areas, some being called the Semites, some being called the Aryans, and in connection with the linguistic cache of knowledge which poured in, starting from the beginning, especially at the beginning of the 19th century, but already in the 18th century. So we have Simmel proposing a certain kind of Dasein. I would say you could superimpose a Simmel Dasein, which is probably, in terms of de facto power, the most powerful form of Dasein, and it coincides with the fact value distinction. We could superimpose over that also the distinction between causality and temporality. Causality going with the things that are already there, the so-called facts. Temporality with the good, the true, the beautiful future, and future in the sense of the Platonic psychology, Platonic subject. Um, so this is a very compact and subtle difficulties here. Um, so it would be helpful if people would write in with specific requests for candor and clarity, short questions. Um, so I had to do, this is going too long, so we set up this issue where I want to show how is Simmel proposing his own, at the foot of sociology, his own, not exactly the foot of sociology, because we already have Auguste Kant, CLFT, and so on, who brought in this notion of replacing morality with this so-called altruism and making it into an empirical notion and all these complexities. But we should try to see this, in my view, in a candorous gaze which doesn't regard the issue, at least not so far as we're doing Socratic analysis with Anubis or the god of the dead, where we take ourselves out of the situation into the highest practice, theoria. We should see what we can see without the violence of the meaning of this dispute in the light of the events of the war, of the death camps, and so on, which put a totally different complexion on the dispute between the so-called, as they've been constituted in a prior idea, the Semites and the Aryans, which one could almost just say Germans and Jews, as it stands in the, as it must be presented in the present discussion. If we want to ask what this whole thing is all about, and to what extent is the discussion constituting the actual existence? What's the play between the fact and the value? How much does the things already there have the slightest inclination to take on that which comes just from the nomos, or from the word, from the understanding, from the what is constituted in human Dasein?